We have an overflow crowd today. In the adjoining auditorium, we have a number of guests that will be watching the proceedings on closed-circuit television. I ask that those guests remain seated because at the end of the program, the President and Leader Pelosi will come and visit with you briefly. Andy Card, as I mentioned to you, will be moderating the program tonight. Mr. Card served as the Deputy Chief at Staff at the White House and as Secretary of Transportation under President Bush number 41. And he also served as the Chief of Staff at the White House under President Bush number 43. He's had a long and distinguished career himself in federal public service as well as on the state level in the state of Massachusetts. I've had the great pleasure of working with Andy for many years and consider him a good friend and colleague. Before I call him out, though, I'd like to make a few acknowledgments tonight. Joining us tonight is the Texas A&M Chancellor, and John Sharp and his lovely wife, Charlotte. Also with us tonight is the President of Texas A&M University, Bowen Lofton, and his lovely wife, Karen. We also have a very special guest, former Congressman Chet Edwards. Chet, I think I speak for everyone in this room, including the President, when we say thank you for your long service to our country. And now, ladies and gentlemen, join me in a nice, warm Aggie welcome for the Dean of the Bush School, Andy Card.
Howdy. Howdy. It is great to be with you, and President Lofton, thank you for making this possible. Appreciate what you're doing, and Chancellor Sharp, thank you very much. What a treat it is to celebrate President's Day with a former president. There aren't too many people around the world that can do that, and we are doing it right here in Aggie land. So, President Bush, thank you very much for allowing us to celebrate President's Day with you. "25 years ago, a woman who had not really planned on running for public office ended up answering a call to run in a special election. And she had already answered a call to public service because she had been serving as a library commissioner in the city of San Francisco, having been appointed by the mayor. She came from a family that was phenomenally involved in politics and in public service. In fact, her family's public service started even before she was born. Her father, when he was only 8 years old, was taken to a Democratic National Convention in Baltimore, Maryland. And at that convention, as an 8-year-old, he heard a wonderful speech from William Jennings Bryan. I should tell Leader Pelosi that we have a William J. Bryan Boulevard, but it's not William Jennings Bryan. It's for Bryan, Texas. But William Jennings Bryan's speech at this convention that took place was a pretty remarkable speech. It came after he had already served as a prominent leader in the Democratic Party, but he was actually lending support to a candidate who was running for president, but hadn't quite found enough votes yet to succeed at the convention. That convention took place literally 100 years ago. And it was a convention that on the 46th ballot nominated Woodrow Wilson to be the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And you know he went on to be the President of the United States. Speaker Pelosi's father went to that convention because his mother brought him there. Women played a major role in all aspects of Speaker Pelosi's life. She played a major role as a woman for all of us. It was pretty remarkable that in reading her autobiography, I came across a story that I actually remembered. I was there. It was in January of 2002, and Nancy Pelosi was invited to come to the White House for a meeting. And I remember the meeting. It took place in the Cabinet Room, and the Cabinet Room's a pretty heady place to go in Washington, D.C., even from people who are pretty heady themselves. But in her book, Nancy Pelosi says that when she took her seat, she realized that there were a lot of other people sitting in the seat already, and they were with her. And they had names like Susan B. Anthony. They were suffragettes. When she took that seat, she realized she was carrying a great burden and realizing a great honor, because she was sitting in a seat of power. The first woman ever to sit in a leadership seat at the White House for any meeting with any president. And she was the minority whip for the party that she represented in the United States Congress. I doubt that when she took that seat, she would have thought much about what it meant to be in the seat and to realize that she was going to have a chance to take another seat. To take a seat as the Speaker of the United States Congress. The first woman ever to hold the speakership, the first Italian-American to ever hold the speakership, only the second person in our nation's history to hold the speakership and come from west of the Rockies. But Nancy Pelosi didn't just take that seat for all women, she took it for all Americans. She brought hope and expectations and responsibilities. I didn't share her philosophy. I didn't share her partisanship, but I shared the service that she respected and the love that she has for our nation and the faith that helped ground her to be able to meet awesome responsibilities in office. Nancy Pelosi grew up in a family where faith was very important, but so was the call to public service. And it wasn't just the service that comes through serving in politics or in office. It was a family that actually volunteered and helped in their neighborhood. And her mother helped an awful lot in struggling neighborhoods in Baltimore and made a big difference. Her dad served as a state legislator in the Maryland House of Delegates as a very young person. In fact, his first election, he got to vote for himself. He served on the Baltimore City Council. He served as the United States Congressman. In fact, Nancy's first visit to the United States Congress was to watch her dad get sworn in for, I think it was his third term. Nancy Pelosi's dad went on to become mayor of Baltimore, and he served for 12 years. And her brother served as mayor of Baltimore. Nancy fell in love. And by the way, she also went to school in Washington, D.C. at Trinity, and her college roommate is here tonight. Nancy Pelosi went on to move to California with her husband, Paul, who is here tonight. And she was a wife, a mother, passionate about policy and politics, and ended up being asked to serve as a library commissioner. Reluctantly, she said yes. Skeptically, she got involved. But the call to public service became very real. It was when a close friend served in Congress, died, and then his wife went on to succeed him, and she got very sick, that Nancy Pelosi, 25 years ago, said she would run for that congressional seat at the invitation of this close friend who was a congresswoman. It was a special election that she had to win, and she won it on April 7th, 25 years ago. It was a tough, tough Republican battle because the Republicans didn't really have many people in the district. So she won that Democratic nomination and went on to win the Congress seat. And she has served there now for 25 years, and boy, has she done a phenomenal job. Nancy Pelosi is someone that all of us should look up to. We don't have to agree with her. We don't have to support her. But we should all respect her for how she brings the noble call of public service to reality. And so with that, I invite now Speaker Nancy Pelosi, leader of the Democrat minority in the United States Congress, to speak to us.
Thank you very much, Andy Card. I guess that's what you call Texas hospitality, to get an introduction like that, right, Mr. President? Mr. President, First Lady Barbara Bush, President Lofton, Chancellor Sharp, all of you, thank you for the wonderful welcome here to Texas A&M. I should have started by saying, howdy. I know that on this one instance, I can speak for each and every one of you in the room when I say that it is a great privilege for each and every one of us to spend President's Day with President George Bush. President Bush's his name and his presidency are synonymous with the word civility, something badly needed in our political discourse today. President Bush followed what Thomas Jefferson said, that every difference of opinion is not a matter of principle, and we should debate accordingly. I particularly want to acknowledge President Bush's support for Mrs. Bush in her literacy programs, which are so important to our children and to our democracy, an informed electorate. Thank you, Mrs. Bush, for your tremendous leadership. A president can only be president with a great First Lady, and wasn't Mrs. Bush a great First Lady? We're so proud of you, so proud of you. I want to acknowledge the leadership of Ambassador Pompanduke here at the George Bush Presidential Library, which I had the honor of touring this afternoon. It's wonderful. I highly recommend it if you haven't been there recently. It even has some updates. And it's about President Bush, but it's about America, too. And he's a great patriot, as we know. Early on, he served his country. He was the youngest at 17 years old, right out of high school. He enlisted at the outbreak of World War II. He was the youngest naval, what do we call it, Mr. President, the youngest pilot in the Navy at the time. And he never ran away from a fight. He never ran away from a fight. But I'll talk about that more in a moment. This is a strong president. He was strong enough and confident enough of his strength that he spoke about a kinder, gentler America. He talked about 1,000 points of light. And that really took great courage. And that's what I see here at Texas A&M. So I have a few words of introduction here, but then we're going to have an exchange. And I'm happy to engage in that exchange with Andy Card. as Ambassador Pompidou said, he has made his very serious contribution from the state legislative level to the White House, to the cabinet, and serving the president. And his commitment to public policy, to patriotism, to love of our country, and a sense of civility are very, very, very well respected in Washington, D.C. You all are fortunate indeed to have him here at Texas A&M now as the acting dean. So again, all of the things that we know about President Bush, how he has reached out, working with President Clinton in a bipartisan, really a nonpartisan way, to help victims of Katrina, victims of tsunamis, victims of the earthquake in Haiti, getting a response from the public that is nothing to match it, really, just so spectacular, but a real sign of the respect that is there for him, and they're working together. Courage to skydive, not once, but twice, in his 80s, over Texas, over College Station. Now, aren't we proud of that brand of courage? I come here as a leader in the House of Representatives, and many of you know a great deal about the president's service to our country, whether it was as a young person right out of school in the war effort, whether it was as our envoy to China, whether it was our representative to the United Nations to stand behind that American flag, to sit behind there and speak for the American people, whether it was his being the director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The list goes on and on, right up to the White House as vice president and then as president of the United States. But did you know that he also served in the House of Representatives for 2 terms? And we in the House feel very proprietary about him. We take great pride, because not many presidents have served in the House, right, Mr. President? Not many. But this is a president who served there for 2 terms, not a long tenure, but the friendships have lingered on. And earlier I told the president that so many of his friends in the Congress, both who served with him and since, send their best and warmest regards to him and always take pride in his service and our association with him in the House of Representatives. Thank you for continuing to take pride in your service in the House of Representatives, Mr. President. Thank you. He knows of what I speak. He came to all of the gym dinners. Now, I myself have never been to the gym. As Andy has said, I've been there for 25 years. This year, I'm celebrating my 25th anniversary, in fact, starting off here, but I still don't even know where the gym is. But the gym dinner, we all knew where the gym dinner was for one big reason, because the Vice President and then the President, George Bush, would come and honor the members of Congress with his friendship, his respect, and that was greatly, greatly returned. In fact, when I was a ranking member, Mr. President, you don't know this, on the Intelligence Committee, your friend and mine, Porter Goss, then the chairman of the committee, came to me and he said, I have something I want to share with you and I want you to be part of. And I know the president would appreciate this. And I said, anything. What does the president want? Anything. He said, well, we want to name the building, the whole compound of the Central Intelligence Agency after President Bush, recognizing his service there and since to the security of our country. Of course, it was my honor to co-sponsor that legislation, and we put it in the bill. And I said, if that's what he wants, that's what we want him to have. And so now, again, security, protect and defend, it's our first responsibility. We take that oath the very first day. And the president has done that as a teenager and all the way up to commander-in-chief and everything in between. And we wanted that acknowledgement to be there. So again, thank you, Mr. President, for your service. President Bush could have had this library any place in the country. You know, he has Eastern roots. Well, he saw the value of coming to Texas as he and Mrs. Bush, and that took a level of courage, didn't it, as young newlyweds, to get in the car with your college car gift and come all the way down to a new place, new Texas state for you, establish yourself, make the record that you did, and create a path that began here in Texas to the White House. But he could have put his library any place, and he chose and took great pride in choosing Texas A&M. And I know that you all take pride in the fact that he did that. This university is marked by the same kind of courage that the president's personal life and public life has exemplified, the word courage. We're very proud that one of your presidents, Robert Gates, served our country as the Secretary of Defense under a Democratic and a Republican president, or I guess in the reverse order. But in any way, first and foremost, for America, when Secretary Gates left College Station when he was here as your president to serve his country, Aggies understood that, because Aggies are renowned for their courage in the field of battle and their contribution to our national security. The Corps of Cadets is a proud reminder of your patriotism and your courage. And I understand that more officers are commissioned from Texas A&M than any other school in the nation except for our service academies. Thank you for helping us honor our oath of office to protect and defend. I had the occasion to be in Texas, in San Antonio on Friday and Saturday in Laredo to celebrate the birthday of President George Washington, and in fact the role that Martha Washington played in the founding of our country. You know, it's a big celebration in Texas. I don't have to say that to you. But at one of the Martha events, I had the privilege of meeting Timothy Erb, Ross Brady, Benjamin Norman, and Michael Powell. I don't know if they're here, but they are members of the Cadet Corps. There they are. Thank you for... And they proudly told me of their work and your work, and they said, be sure when you're there to do this. In fact, one of my colleagues, Congressman Cuellar, who's a graduate of UT Austin, in a picture that we had taken with the cadets, the cadets made us all do this. So we have Cuellar on record doing this, even though he didn't have. But the story that I love and that I learned more about in preparation for visiting here is the story of Earl Rudder, another leader who demonstrated Aggie courage. You know the story of Texas A&M's 16th president, who was called away to war and found himself commanding a battalion of Rangers on D-Day. You know about his valor leading men up the scaling of 100-foot cliffs at Pointe du Hoc under unrelenting enemy fire to destroy German gun batteries and help open the beaches below to the Allied forces landing. Wounded twice, he fought on for 2 days, this Aggie did, until victory was secured in this critical turning point of the war. It all started here. What you might not know is that recent years, Pointe du Hoc was in disrepair. The erosion was causing it to just fade away, and visitors could no longer come and visit and bear witness to the courage and the difference that it made in the war. That was until another courageous Aggie, who was earlier acknowledged, Congressman Chet Edwards, he went to work in the House of Representatives to preserve the sacred site. Many experts told Congressman Edwards that Pointe du Hoc was damaged beyond repair, but Aggie engineers stepped in and disagreed. They devised a plan to save it, and Congressman Edwards secured a $6 million investment to shore up those cliffs. I think that was an earmark, Mr. President. But we will call it a national priority of great significance, because it certainly was that as well. And Chet Edwards had all this passion for the subject because he had received himself the Earl Rudder Award upon his graduation from Texas A&M, and he would therefore then be in position to save this important A&M legacy. Last year, the 67th anniversary of D-Day, Pointe du Hoc reopened. Now these hills will stand forever, thanks to the Aggies, as a solid testament to Aggie courage and for the safety of America. We thank you for that. Now, Andy Card mentioned that my college roommate was here, and what's important about that is the thread that runs through so many of us. And that is that my college roommate was my college roommate, Rita Meyer. She's here with her husband, Dennis. Her daughter is very close friends with Marshall Bush, the granddaughter of the Bushes, and they love each other very much. So I could not have told her a better thing than to say that I had been invited to come on President's Day to honor President and Mrs. Bush and to have this opportunity to speak with you. She happens to be the godmother of my daughter, Jacqueline. My husband and I are godparents to her daughter, Katie. And Jacqueline is here with her husband, Michael, a Republican, I might add. Not that it matters. I told the president that in 1992, when Michael was at Cornell getting his MBA, somehow or other his absentee ballot did not reach him. His father, who was a stern taskmaster, never let any of the kids miss school or class, and the two of them decided that that was one thing, but it was another thing to miss a vote for President Bush. So he left Cornell, came to Texas so he could cast his vote for for President George Bush, and that's that part of the family. All of us respecting and loving the president, and they're here with our three cowboys, Liam, Sean, and Ryan Keneally, all of us now going into another generation of regard for this great president and his contribution to our country. So, Mr. President, Mrs. Bush, Dean Card, members of the Board of Trustees, it really is, I hope you know, for me, a great privilege, personally, officially, and in every way, on behalf of the House of Representatives, to bring all of you greetings, to bear our testimony to the greatness of President Bush, to say how pleased I am to do this on President's Day, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that significance, and to be able to do it at Texas A&M. Gig 'em. Thank you all. Paul, he was introduced earlier, my daughter Jacqueline, as we get wired up. My husband, Paul. Mrs. Bush, 48 years. We're catching up to you, 48 years.
Madam Leader, thank you very much. When I mentioned how you had made a significant difference for women, there were a lot of women, not only in this audience, but around the globe, that really would like to hear the story of how you were able to realize the dreams that probably weren't even the real dreams of Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others. And what was it like to realize that you were carrying not only the burden, but the opportunity for others to experience?
Well, thank you, Andy, and thank you for telling that story about my first day when President George W. Bush was president, and I went to the White House for my first meeting as a leader. And I wasn't too apprehensive about it. And I've been to the White House for many meetings until that meeting, which I realized, as Andy said, Dean Card said, was unlike any meeting any woman had ever been to before. And when they were all sitting on the chair with me, I could hear them say, "At last, we have a seat at the table." And then they were gone. And my first thought was, we want more. But I never set out to do this. I'm a mom of 5 children. I volunteered at the library. They said, you should be a commissioner. I said, I don't really need a title. Oh, yes, you should have it. And I did, and one thing led to another. And that's what I say to young women, and women, whether it's young or coming out, as I did, from the kitchen to the Congress, or young women just coming up, be ready. You never know what opportunity might be there. Have confidence in who you are, because nobody's like you. Nobody is like you. But when I was coming up, I had absolutely no idea that I would ever run for public office. It was not in even my thought that I would do such a thing. But an opportunity came, and I was ready. And then one thing led to another in Congress, and then I had the opportunity, never. People said, oh, she wanted to be Speaker since she was 5 years old. Not so. Not so. And when I was a teenager, it was rock around the clock. I wasn't interested at all. But the fact is that really nothing has been more wholesome for the political process or for governmental and public service process than the increased participation of women. It really is urgent that women take responsibility for leadership on the decisions that have to be made for our country. I know one thing, and it's hard because women say to me, oh, I can't raise the money, or I don't want all that money spent against me. You're familiar with that phenomenon. But I believe that if we can reform the role of money in our political system, and this is part of what I'm trying to do now, is to reduce the role of money, increase the voice of the people. If we do that, I promise you, we will have many more women elected to public office. That would be something that's transformative. So, you mentioned my book. It's called Know Your Power, and that's my message to young women, and again, women young into the process, whatever their age is. Know your power. Know what you can bring to the table. Know that there's no contribution like the one that you can make, and that holds true for our young men as well. So I'm optimistic that if we can succeed in the reforms that we need to make in reducing the role of money, that many more women will be involved. That will be a good thing. Otherwise, it'll be incremental for the rest of eternity. 10 more this year, 2 more next year. Now we're just going to make our own environment, just change the whole environment, one that is much more conducive to us having the fullest participation. And if women wish to participate, they can, and if they don't, they won't. But it won't because there's a barrier to that participation. So, go for it.
You grew up in a family where politics was really not a dirty word. It was a noble calling. And I know that you participated in campaigns, and I was struck in reading your autobiography that your mother played a very big role in your election to Congress, even though she was thousands of miles away on the other coast. And your mother's, I guess she sent letters to her friends?
No, this is my mother-in-law.
Oh, your
now we're talking about mother-in-law. First of all, everybody always talks about my father because he was the elected official. Mrs. Bush will know what I mean when I say my mother was a very important part of all of that, sharing the values, holding down the home front, giving from time to time candid advice, would you say? What do you think, Mr. President? Was it candid, ever candid? In any event, they were a team, and their values about our responsibility from one person to the next, our sense of community, were imbued in me, but not to the extent that I wanted to play the role myself. I wanted to support other people to do it. But when I ran, nobody ever thought I ever wanted to run for office, including me, and certainly my husband. And when the opportunity came, we had these 5 children. 4 of them were in college. 1 was a senior in high school. So since we're here at a college, I'll tell you the story. So I go to Alexandra, who's now going to be a senior in high school, and I say, Alexandra, Mommy has an opportunity to run, but I wish it were 1 year later, so when you're in college, any answer is fine. I'm happy to stay home with you if that's your answer, or I can run, no guarantee that I will win. And she said, now a phrase I had never heard before, this is 25 years ago, she said, Mother, get a life. And so I did, and another life. Another life. I had a very happy life. But my husband, of course, Paul, he was very supportive, whatever you wish, whatever you wish. And our son, Paul Jr., is here. Where's Paul Jr.? I didn't see him right there. There is Paul. Paul remembers that story very well because he had been off to prep school and to college. And so he knew that Alexandra would be, say, home alone, but with Dad, and that worked out. But the thing about it is that it is my mother-in-law. Now I am totally like not registering in any poll because I've never run for office. All the people who were running were elected officials who had run on more than one occasion citywide in San Francisco. So we just had to build our own base, create our own environment. So my husband's mother, Nana, as we called her, Nana, she wrote to 8,000 Italian-American surname people in San Francisco. We captured a few Hispanics in the vowels at the end of the name. But in any event, it was that kind of a retail effort, door to door, name for name, and that's what it takes, my sisters. It takes really that kind of an effort to win, and that's the way it should be. It shouldn't be. It should be about the voice of the people, not the bankroll of a few people that determines what the outcome of our elections will be.
You represent a very diverse district. It may not be philosophically diverse, but it is a very diverse district. And when you came to Congress, I remember you came carrying an awful lot of passion to help the fight against AIDS. And I was struck in your book where you had approached someone who's a close friend of mine. We served together in the Massachusetts legislature, Barney Frank. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I think you were expressing some frustration because you were trying to gain a little support. And he offered you surprising advice that, quite frankly, I haven't found him following. When he said, speak very few words very bluntly.
Well, that's right, he did, because, and so now when I talk to him, but it served me well, Mr. President and Mrs. Bush, because when I would then, after that conversation, when I'd call people, I'd say, hi, this is Nancy. Subject, whatever. Problem, well, question. You know, I would speak like that, and they'd be like, why are you talking that way? Well, I'm speaking if you want to have a conversation, we can, but I want to make sure that right up front, no small talk, we get right to the point. But what was interesting about that time, even predating that conversation with Barney, which I found to be very useful, he talks a lot. You know, people who talk a lot don't necessarily want to hear a lot from other people. So he liked us to be brief so that he could be long. But he's brilliant, and when he leaves the Congress, as you know, it will have a tremendous impact. And though he has a reputation as a progressive Democrat, he's as fair and as open and as wise and listening to solutions that will really hold up, because they don't come from one wing, but they are the benefit of the thinking of many people. But when I went to Congress, the first day I was there, this has a Texas connection. They said to me, some of my friends that I knew in Congress from before, they said, when you are sworn in, all you say is yes. Do you uphold the Constitution? You swear to protect and defend the Constitution. All you say is yes, and then go sit down. Nobody wants to hear. Maybe it's a women thing, I don't know, but nobody wants to hear any more than that. So this is 25 years ago minus a few months. So I make my speech. My father was on the floor, Mr. President, because he had served in Congress and, you know, had rights to be on the floor. So I acknowledged my parents, my father, my constituents who sent me there, and that. And then, oh, let me say this. So when I said yes, the Speaker of the House, Jim Wright, he said, would the gentle lady from California wish to address the House? Oh my gosh, they told me just to say yes. So then they were saying, just be short, just be really short, just really be brief. So I got up and, as I said to you, acknowledged my father, my mother, my constituents, and I said, being brief, I said, I told my constituents that when I came here, that I'm coming here to fight against HIV and AIDS. End of speech. Took me longer to tell you about it than it took me to say it. So I go back to my seat, I look over to my friends, and they're like, oh. I said, well, how could I have been shorter than that? And they said, well, that isn't the point. Why would you want the first thing anybody knows about you to be that you're here to fight against AIDS? Imagine. That was 25 years ago. Imagine that they would say that. And they said, why did you say that? Well, I said it for a simple reason. That's why I did come here. Because our district had, oh my, we had taken such a big bite of that wormy apple. People were dying. We were going to 2 funerals in a day. We learned a lot about community-based prevention, community-based cure, not cure, research for a cure, community-based non-discrimination, all of those things. And I thought it would be important for us to convey that. And, but they just didn't think it should be mentioned on the floor of the House 25 years ago as the first thing I would say. I never really thought 25 years ago when I said that, reaching out 25 years to now, there would not be a cure by now. But we have been able to sustain life because of the increased funding for research, some of it under the leadership of President Bush, increased funding for prevention and care, and ending discrimination against people with HIV and AIDS. We still have that struggle. But that is the struggle that we have. We have it with cancer, we have it with Alzheimer's, we have it with Parkinson's. We have really got to make even a bigger commitment as science has advanced through the Genome Project and through advanced technologies that enable us to see more, to put more of our resources in a place where there is scientific opportunity. I think we have a moral responsibility to do the research, to have a healthier America. So that is a priority that I think everyone in America shares. Your questions for Martin?
I remember you working very hard to help the people who put together the quilt so that we'd remember those people who had died of AIDS. And there was a pretty dramatic story about the quilt being on the mall. And I remember when the quilt came to the mall. And could you tell us what the deal was to allow them to put the quilt there?
Well, I thank the president, because without him, we would not have been able to do this. But let me first tell you that when now 25 years ago, I'm now the nominee, which in San Francisco really means that the president...
Democratic nominees in San Francisco are the winners.
But President Bush has many friends in San Francisco, right, President Bush? They came to me and they said, we want you to be part of a press conference that we're going to put together a quilt where people are going to make quilts, patches, and they're going to put together this quilt that's going to be so spectacular, and it's going to be an expression of mourning and renewal and therapy for people, and it will demonstrate how widespread it is, because it'll be it'll be all kinds of people who have died of AIDS. I said, forget it. Nobody sews anymore. I said, I went to school, I took crochet, I took knitting, I took sewing, I took darning, I took all those things as a little girl. I don't even sew anymore, and I have 5 kids. Who's going to, now I just want you to know my great foresight and all of this. I said, who's going to do this? They said, everybody. I was wrong, they were right, everybody. And so in a really short period of time, this quilt was as big as the mall, even bigger, but it could fill the mall, just really almost instantly. So we wanted to show it off in the mall. And we went to the Park Service said, no, you can really have like a corner of like a corner, a street corner, and put a few patches there. And we said, that's not really what we had in mind. We want the mall for the quilt. And then one thing and another, back and forth. We had a promise. Every 20 minutes we would lift the quilt, So the grass underneath would be aerated, and that the quilt did not. And so, thanks to the Bush administration, we were able to do that. We were able to do that and lift the quilt, because without the executive, I was coming as like one of the newest members of, a couple years into my term. I had zero clout, but these things don't happen just because I convinced an employee at a certain level. It had to come from above, and it did come from above. And from above, helicopters and newscasters and all the rest showed this remarkable statement of support for people with HIV/AIDS. I had a quilt there for a little girl, was a flower girl, my wedding. She had a situation where she died of AIDS. Her family couldn't even grasp what that was, but we had our own. But everybody had their own, and we made each other's own. And but I had not the faintest idea that people were into sewing into our country. And left to me, it would never have happened. But since I had to make up for that, I had to be sure that we could show it on the mall.
I remember you with a very loud voice, standing up.
Yelling?
Standing up during a very challenging time for the dissidents in China. And it was a time that was a significant diplomatic challenge for the president, as he had to deal with the ramifications of Tiananmen Square and whatever. But your voice was very loud, and I do remember you being a champion for the dissidents, not only in China, but also for those who were fighting for recognition in China. And I remember your meetings at the White House and others where you were pretty vocal, and the truth is, people heard you.
I appreciate your saying that. It is, I have always believed that if we're going to have moral authority on human rights, we have to do it with big countries as well as small countries, that we just can't select where human rights are important or not. The issue that we were fighting for at the time was a very discrete, specific, well, we wanted to free the dissidents. We wanted to stop the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. We wanted to open their markets to our product, all that. But in particular, we had one discrete issue, and that was that the Chinese dissidents who were in America, and they had demonstrated in support of those in Tiananmen Square, and some who had escaped from Tiananmen Square and came to America, that they would be able to stay here, because the Chinese embassy and consulates and all had taped every demonstration, and to go back to China would mean you're going to jail or worse. So our pitch was that we wanted, and actually Lamar Smith was helpful. This was a bipartisan effort that we had in the Congress, and it placed the president in a difficult place with the Chinese. We won in the House, we won in the Senate, but we didn't win the day. And the president came through for us because he issued an while we didn't get the legislation, the president issued an executive order protecting those Chinese dissidents in America. So while we didn't get get it done our way, it did get done, and that was very courageous on the part of President Bush, and I thank you for that. But we had our moments.
I remember that sometimes the friction in Washington gets pretty hard to deal with, and congressmen like Chet Edwards did a great job of standing up to represent their constituents, and Congressman Edwards certainly did a terrific job of representing constituents far beyond his district, because working with you, he helped bring a lot of veterans benefits to people who have recently served in the service, and it's made a difference. And I know that Congressman Edwards gives you an awful lot of credit, and I give him a lot of credit as well, but you certainly were the one that pushed that legislation through and made it possible for many of our veterans today to get benefits. In fact, Congressman Edwards claims that you've done more than any speaker in history to provide benefits to veterans of our armed services.
I appreciate your saying that, and I will speak about Congressman Edwards, but because of his leadership and his knowledge of the issue. Because we can all say we're for veterans, right? Now, what is it that we're going to do about it? And when I became leader, we said we are planting a flag for our veterans. Enough about the talk. What is it that we can do? Because now we have veterans coming back from Iraq. Now in the 2000s, the veterans coming from Iraq, now Afghanistan, and the rest. And Congressman, where is he? I keep looking for him here. Right there. Congressman Edwards was the chairman, at one point, the senior Democrat when we were not in the majority, and then the chairman of the committee that funds the veterans initiatives, whatever they may be. His motto was the motto of our military, and something that saved our president, the president. On the battlefield, we leave no soldier behind. Mr. Edwards follows with, and when they come home, we leave no veteran behind. So what would be the priorities? The list is very long, the needs of our veterans. What would be their priorities? And we met with them regularly, and still do, to see what their priorities were. And they involved many things: advanced funding, so that any time Congress gets involved in budget fights, they're out of the fray because their funding is advanced. And any threat to say, well, we're not funding the government, will not affect them because they're advance funded. But also issues that relate to the GI Bill, working with a lot of the vets coming home. We had a campaign, Thank Our Vets, Send Them to College. Had a big GI initiative. But I think one of the bills that gets personal and drives home how, again, knowledge informs decisions is that Chet came and he said, you know, we passed this GI Bill that these kids would have the ability to go to college. And it's even transferable to, and that was a debate too, should it be transferable to a family member? And we decided that it could be transferable to a family member. However, if that person died in battle, the benefit ended. So if you lived, you could go to college, and your family member could. But if you died, it was gone. How could that make sense? An unintended consequence. And he just fought and fought and fought because to reopen all of these issues is, you have to find a path, because we wanted it to happen right away, in real time, because that's how that person died, in real time, and how that family got that news. So Chet, thank you for leading the way for us to do so many things for our vets. The GI Bill for the 21st century, so many things, the jobs initiatives for our vets, the education initiatives, and that one that brought, and Chet was telling me earlier about a woman who had 6 children, and her husband died in the war, and now she knows that her kids will go to school. And that, of course, comes back to what I said about Mrs. Bush earlier. Literacy, learning, the education of our children, it's important for them. It's important for our democracy. So I want to thank Chet Edwards for his tremendous, tremendous leadership. I appreciate the credit that I received. Let's say it this way. It simply could not have happened without Chet Edwards. So thank you, Chet. And I see we've been joined by another one of my colleagues, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee from the Houston area. Thank you, Sheila, for being with us. Sheila is also a fighter for our veterans and our children and all Americans. Thank you, Sheila, for being here.
Madam Leader, the audience submitted some questions, and one of the questions relates to a pretty tough issue. You are a woman of phenomenal faith, and you have been strong in practicing your faith. Your family has lived the faith, and I'm a witness to that, and I know the role that family has played in your life. But one of the great debates taking place today has your church and the public policy questions that need to be answered in conflict over the question of contraception. And that was one of the questions that came from the audience. I wondered if you can talk about your faith in the context of public policy and your role as a policy maker in public policy.
I thank you, Andy, for that question, and I think it's important to have the discussion, although it's a difficult subject to talk about because it is so personal. It's personal in terms of it being a women's health issue. It's personal about being part of our faith. The issue is, in my view, not about contraception. It's about women's health. It's about women's health. I think that one thing that was demonstrated in the course of the debate when the president made his first proclamation, I guess is the word, how they said that they were going to proceed by saying that institutions, churches could still continue to have the waiver, but if you're engaged in universities and hospitals and things that had some element of commerce to them and the rest, that you would have a responsibility to provide a contraception as other insurers were required to do. And there was all this ho-ha that it was church and state and the rest of that. So the president then went to the next step and said, okay, then the insurers have to ensure free access to contraception and family planning. And that was very interesting to me because, again, I come from a family that you would call pro-life. They don't share my views on a woman's right to choose and the rest of that. So I've raised in that atmosphere. I understand it. I respect it. But the fact is that this was now no longer I don't think it was ever an issue of church and state. But if you did, now it isn't. And those same people who were saying it was an issue of church and state were now saying, well, we don't think any insurers should provide free contraceptive care. So they really revealed to themselves that they really, now, again, this is so personal. I mean, I'm of an age where we don't really even talk about these kinds of things in public, but nonetheless, they have, right, Mrs. Bush? I mean, in our day, we didn't talk publicly about these matters. But this really is a matter of women's health. And women have traditionally been discriminated against in the health insurance industry. I know, having 5 children, when I would call for insurance, they'd say, you're a poor risk, you've had 5 children. I said, how could I be a poor risk? Having 5 children is a sign of strength. And one of the benefits of the Affordable Care Act is no longer being a woman will be a pre-existing medical condition. But this is a matter so personal. It's about women's health. There's some women who need access to these medications that have nothing to do with reproduction, but to have to do with how women's health works. A. B, a decision about the sizing and the size and the timing of your family, that's really personal. And that's a matter of conscience for each person. Now the church, again, they tell me 98% of women 14 to whatever childbearing age goes up to, maybe 50 years old, I don't know, 40-some years old, 98% of women in childbearing age who are Catholic use contraception. Okay, so in practice, the church has not enforced this, and now they want the federal government and private insurance to enforce it. It just isn't consistent to me. Whatever my personal beliefs or my personal upbringing are on this subject, everyone has their own responsibility in terms of the size and the rest of their family. So I think that this should be removed from the debate. It's inflammatory, misrepresentations are made. I want to say this, and you know, maybe overstating this, and I can't speak for everyone, but there's a sisterhood, there's a sisters under the skin understanding of this issue among women. It isn't going to determine, it may determine how some women vote or don't vote, but everybody knows that the management of a family should respect the discretion of the mother, because her health is important to that family. Her decisions with her husband, her doctor, and her God are important to the family. And just, I mean, how can we say the federal government or private insurance companies should enforce something that the church itself has not been able to enforce? So I've said, I think that's the most I have ever said on the subject, and I say it because I respect this audience and you asked that question. But it isn't without a level of discomfort that we even have to go to that place. If you want, you know, we all say that abortion should be rare and safe and, if necessary, and the rest of that. So why wouldn't we say that, again, a woman's management of her situation probably would do a lot to prevent going to a place that is even more controversial in those terms. It's very sad, and we all have to pray over it. And God, and I say my mother, I won't even tell you the conversations we've had on this subject, but we have differing views. But on the other hand, she taught me that we all have a free will, and we're all responsible for the decisions that we make, and that free will is a gift of God. My hope is that another gift of God, science, will take us even further away from this discussion, which is really shouldn't be, I don't think, a public policy issue. And the same kind of science that can help us help women with the size and timing of their families is the same kind of science that can help us with infertility and other health issues that women face. So let's be prayerful about how we go forward on that.
Well, we've almost reached the end of our time, and I wish this conversation could go on a lot longer, because we've got a lot of interesting things that we could be talking about. I will say this, that Speaker Pelosi has been very wonderful about demonstrating to all of us the value of answering the invitation to public service. And the Bush School is the premier school in America right now in terms of bringing President Bush's goal is to make sure that the graduate students who attend the Bush School are well trained and ready to be in public service to our nation, not only in form of government work, but also in work with our nonprofit organizations. And the call to public service is something that he answered at a very young age because of a family that inculcated him with the responsibility to participate, and that's his 50-cent word that I heard over and over again. And Nancy Pelosi, you certainly were inculcated with the expectation that you would be giving back to our country and through service, and you've certainly done it well. And we are all very proud to say that the glass ceiling was broken.
Marble ceiling.
You were the 60th Speaker of the United States Congress, the first female speaker, and it has been an honest privilege to have you come here, and I thank President Bush for allowing this invitation to be delivered, and for the real dean, Ryan Crocker, for delivering the invitation.
Yes, Ryan.
I just got to be the one to moderate the debate, and thank you very much.
Let me say this about Andy Card. As I said to you at the beginning, President Bush subscribed in his leadership and his role as president to what Jefferson said. As I said earlier, every difference of opinion is not a matter of principle, and we should treat each other with respect in those debates and the rest, and listen to each other. And one of the things that President Bush, and many things, but appropriate for this evening, that he did was to name Andy Card into a position of leadership. His liaison with the Congress, and his leadership in the office that he held in the White House was important to us. Many members from Massachusetts, of course, knew him. They had contests to see who could say what a greater guy he was, even though they were all Democrats. They were all, I think, except for one, Democrats. But they all, and that was the attitude that this president and his, the leadership in his office as chief of staff, the respect that they had for Congress was reciprocated back to them, and they led with a level of civility that taught us a lot and that we miss. And in that spirit, I want to once again say, Mr. President, what an honor it is to be with you. All of my colleagues in Congress send you best regards with appreciation, with admiration, and Mrs. Bush with affection. So thank you again for this great honor to be with you today.